we are, as a profession, worthy of being at
Mm-hmm.
the table, providing the strategy that we can push forward, and sometimes taking our licks, because sometimes not every idea is a good one. But I will tell you, not every lawyer wins every case.
Welcome to Spill the Ink, a podcast by Reputation Inc., where we feature experts in growth and brand visibility for law firms and architecture, engineering, and construction firms. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, and thanks for being with us for another episode of Spill the Ink. I'm Michelle Calcote King, your host and the principal and president of Reputation Inc. We're a public relations and thought leadership marketing agency for B2B professional services firms, including law firms. To learn more, go to rep-inc, that's inc with a K.com. So if you've ever heard the phrase legal marketing is behind the times and thought, this conversation is for you. Our guest today argues that many law firms are actually doing some incredible things and deserve some credit. We're also going to kind of dive into what it really takes to succeed in legal marketing, from understanding complex service cycles to earning that coveted seat at the table. So I'm going to welcome John Byrne to our podcast. Now, I know a lot of people in the community know him. He is the Chief Marketing Officer at Gould Ratner. Did I just mispronounce that again?
No, you did.
Did I do it right, John? Oh, yay, I got it right. I had mispronounced it in our pre-session conversation there. And he's also the current president. He just started his term of the Legal Marketing Association. And I'm on the Southeast board, so I got to already hear him talk and hear his vision for the year. So I'm very excited about that. But he has 3 decades in the legal marketing profession. He brings a unique blend of experience as a former practicing attorney, journalist, publisher, and marketing leader. Boy, you've hit all the right background skill sets.
Couldn't keep a job.
Yeah, no, that's the perfect mix. And he leans onto to create strategies that drive growth and deliver unparalleled service to clients. So welcome to the show, John. Really excited to have you here.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate the invite, and hopefully this will be worth your while and worth others.
No, I'm excited to talk about it. So, well, I guess I did that small intro, but if you don't mind, for anyone who's listening and hasn't met you before, tell me a little bit about your career. So that's a really great background, but give us a little flavor.
So I like to say I started life as a journalist. I was a sports desk clerk at a local paper where I grew up in suburban Chicago. Went to journalism school at Northwestern, got a job at the St. Petersburg Times in Florida after college. Realized I was interested in the law and wanted to be a media lawyer. Lo and behold, went to law school back in Chicago at Loyola, discovered there's only about a handful of media lawyers and they all work in New York at really highfalutin firms that weren't going to hire me. So went into litigation, did that for a couple of years. And this is all in the early to mid 90s. So I'm unfortunately a little bit of a grizzled veteran, I guess, when it comes to understanding that you can actually practice law with a dictaphone and not a computer, which is terrifying to some people probably. But then actually went back to my roots and started working for a unit back at Loyola, actually doing some PR and marketing and sales and career development for both their undergrad degree completion program and the law school. Ended up joining the burgeoning field of legal marketing in the late 90s, working at a small little firm called Cat Mushin in Chicago, which is not small for those of you who are unfamiliar.
Yeah.
And hired by someone who's been well known in the legal industry, Teresa Jaffe, worked there for a couple years. Actually ended up moving down south, did some more recruiting, did some more marketing, did some more publishing of a local magazine. So, which is when people who don't understand what publishing is sometimes don't understand that, that's a lot of sales. And we did a lot of sales back when actually people still looked at magazines in paper as opposed to online. And then ended up in Philadelphia working for Drinker, Riddle and Reith. Started as a manager, ended up CMO, was there for 8 years. Did a couple little years doing some consulting work for myself. Decided I hated my boss and found a firm in Chicago that I've been there for, going on 9 years, since 2016. And it's a sophisticated firm, relatively small, 55 lawyers. We have an office in Denver too. We just opened. We do a ton of M&A and real estate and fund work and trust and estates, private clients, and it's a lot of fun and sophisticated. And so I've kind of seen it all: big firm, small firm, mid firm.
Yeah.
I've been a consultant too, so I have been doing that for a long time. Have been involved in LMA for over going on 26, 7 years, since '97, I think. So have been on the board for a while, and then now I'm the president. And we got a lot of stuff cooking. We're past the pandemic, and we've got a lot going on that I think is really positive for individual members and the industry at large.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm on the board of the Southeast, and the our focus today isn't to talk about your role on LMA, but I'd love to hear what your focus for the year is, and what you're hoping to achieve.
Well, we've got a bunch of different things. We've got a new strategic plan. One of them is to take a look at member benefits and the membership experience as a whole. And we've got a whole plan for that. We're actually going to recommit to DEI principles that we've already committed to, but we're going to go back and recommit to them, especially given the times. There are a lot of people who are
Yeah.
still very interested and committed to diversity and inclusion. And we are one of them as an organization.
Yeah.
And we're independent, so we can be.
Yeah.
So the other aspect, which is kind of getting into today's topics, I think, is one that involves and revolves around advocacy for the profession and for the individuals in the profession. And part of that is trying to build up the association as an advocate for our members and the profession at large, and to really come into our own in a way that, even though it's our 40th anniversary this year, we're still working on it, and it's always a
Yeah.
work in progress in many ways. And we have made significant strides, leaps and bounds. But to the topic we've sort of picked today to talk a little bit about, maybe it's not so much an inferiority complex, but it's a little bit of maybe a little. It's a mix of maybe occasional imposter syndrome and occasional inferiority syndrome, occasional naivete, perhaps in some ways, shapes or forms, and maybe a little overconfidence in others. So
Mm.
I'm happy to dig in whenever.
No, let's talk about that. So, I know you said, so it's one of the things you were telling my producer is, a lot of people say legal marketing is behind the times compared to other professional services firms. And you're saying that's not true in a lot of cases. And tell me why you say, look, there's a lot of firms actually out there doing some really impressive things.
Yeah, so it's funny. This came up as an idea because I was sitting, as many CMOs are, and even others in the legal marketing profession, member of a roundtable that meets a couple times a year. We were sitting at one of these roundtables maybe about 6 months ago, and
Hmm.
we were talking about just this very topic. And we've got one of our members is a great, terrific guy who worked at one of the big four back then. I think it was the big eight when he was there, but he's been the CMO at a firm for a long time too. And we got into like, well, the big four, the consulting and accounting firms, they're so far ahead of us. And I said, wait a minute, are they really? Because,
Hmm.
there's a lot of things that we could talk about that I don't think that they really are that ahead of us. And the room kind of broke up in laughter and scoffed at me and my usual, because I tend to be, when I'm not in a leadership role, I tend to be a little kind of classic, which I'm sure drives leaders crazy. But and I said, this is true. And they're like, give me 3 reasons. I'm like, well, how much time do we have? So
Hmm.
I think what happens is that because we sort of were a follow-on addition to the business of law at law firms, at least, right? Because, law firms always have had to have accountants or bookkeepers at the very least, right?
Hmm.
They've always had to have secretaries. They've always had to have paralegals and obviously lawyers. They've always had to have a docketing system if you're a litigation firm. They always have to have a file room, all this stuff, this infrastructure that was in place for literally decades, if not centuries. Marketing is relatively new. 77 was the onset of the ability for lawyers to actually advertise and market in the United States. And so, still a relatively, and we're only 40 years old as an association. I think the ALA, which is the administrators slash, the folks who do all the other business side of a law,
Hmm.
I think they're turning 50 or 55, somewhere around there. I'm a member. I should know that, so I apologize. My boss is actually on their board of directors. I should probably get that number in my head and keep it there. But, so we're still kind of relatively young in comparison, right? And laws,
Hmm.
common laws
Right.
for millennia. So
Hmm.
it's not hard. It's not hard necessarily to get into like, oh, we're still kind of feeling our way, but we've actually come a long way, and we've had a lot of people to learn from, and we've come up with some other
Hmm.
ideas. And I think what happens too is that we tend to forget that law is a tough business overall, especially one to market, because there's a lot of different restrictions. I've brought along many people over my career in from other industries, other professional services firms who aren't laws and who haven't been working for lawyers, and they say, okay, well, let's start. You can't do this. You can't do this. You can't do this. You can't do, there's a lot of can'ts and shouldn'ts and
Right.
wouldn'ts. And so that already creates bumpers around some of the stuff we can do. But I think, and sales used to be a dirty word. I don't think it is anymore. But, and lawyers have changed, thankfully, overall, and then suddenly started to embrace marketing because they realized that despite some of the hue and the cry over the years of how much the law profession is going to change, and that it was going to be multidisciplinary practice 25 years ago, and then it was going to be, I don't even remember, it was going to be the death of the billable hour and all this other stuff. Some of that stuff has happened around the edges. Arizona just approved a multidisciplinary practice type thing for one of the big four firms coming in. The billable hour is still around, even though we now have all these alternative fees arrangements that are out there. And now what's the big bugaboo? AI. Oh my.
Right.
Well, I don't know if you've used any type of generative or other types of AI. It is a wonderful, magical tool when it works.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately,
Yeah.
it doesn't work at least as far as I would like it to work as much as possible.
Right.
Still
Yeah.
a little ways to go. So I think having that sort of perspective and understanding that we already started from kind of behind the starting line when it came to marketing, and see how far we've gotten in comparison to other professional services firms, and who can operate sometimes without one arm tied behind their back, or when they find the problems. And if you go back and look at the big four, I mean, Arthur Andersen decided to split off Accenture because it wanted to take its audit business and not have the conflicts with its consulting business. And so it said, here, let's snip these apart. Law firms can't do that, right? We still have conflicts. We still can't represent two sides against the other without some sort of waiver. And there's some unwaivable matters that you never do. And you have to pick sides. Do you represent employers or do you represent unions? Do you represent banks or do you represent the people who sue banks? Insurance companies versus the people who sue insurance.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a lot of sophistication just in the nature of having to do legal marketing that we don't give ourselves credit for, enough credit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the lawyers actually don't give themselves credit too. And so that kind of filters its way down to the people who are trying to help the lawyer sell. Because like it or not, for the most part, the people closing deals to get new business are the lawyers. Yes, there are situations where it's not always the lawyers, but at the end of the day, it's lawyers, and we're paid to help them. And and it's fun. It should be fun, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of times the accounting firms or whatever, even just simple tactical stuff, they don't do this much as we do. I defy you to find that every single large accounting firm, forget the big four for a minute, every single large accounting firm has bios for every single one of its accountants on the web.
Yeah.
Don't. They might have a phone number and their email address. They don't have bios. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, we've got firms like DLA Piper or Denton's or Baker or Kirkland who have thousands. My old firm, have thousands of lawyers on their website. Every single one of them has a bio, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's. I mean, and maybe we could sit and have a conversation, not here, but well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's not either or, in my opinion. But it is indicative of the fact that we are doing stuff that others aren't, even if it's just maybe more work. But let's talk about the sophisticated stuff. That's very tactical. The sophisticated stuff, law firms have been on a strategic level, and with the help of marketing and others in the business operation, have been able to basically raise rates above the rate of inflation for decades and make a fair amount of money and have a very good profit margin. Now, you could argue that some of the consulting firms, especially the big ones, have been able to do that too. There's a lot of accounting firms that have not. And a lot of accounting firms from a strategic marketing level are still trying to just go after and leverage the heck out of their accountants doing any type of work that they can that's commodity based. And now I'm going to have people flinging arrows at me for this. But look, on the whole, pound for pound, professional services firms like accounting firms are doing a lot more commodity work than most big time law firms. Well, certainly most big time law firms, and even law firms like mine that still do sophisticated work, but maybe for the middle market, right?
Yeah.
So I think that and we can talk more about this. I'll finish my long-winded answer here, but
no, it's great.
I think that there's a lot more pride that we can be taking in the stuff that we do overall and how far we've come as legal marketers, because we are to the point, and I would defy anybody to dispute this, we are to the point where you cannot be a successful law firm without talented marketers and business developers behind you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, well, I'd love your take on what are some of the things that you think law firms do particularly well? Because when I was thinking about this topic, I remember when I first got into legal marketing, it was sort of the beginning of content marketing and thought leadership as a concept. This was like 15 years ago or so. And no one was creating content, but you know who was? Law firms. Law firms were the only, and this was new. This was, no one was writing blog posts or emails offering educational advice. That was a new concept back then, except for law firms. And I remember looking at that thinking, these people are actually ahead of the game. I mean, lawyers were blogging before blogging was really cool. And we kind of forget that they actually kind of were ahead of the game with that tactic, in terms of, because content marketing, I often have to explain to my employees that didn't, that didn't exist, as a tactic or strategy. And but law firms got it, because we work with other professional services firms, and I'm still convincing architecture firms, engineering firms to develop educational content. And I've never had to do that. And yes, there's issues with uh, getting it right, all those, doing it consistently, all that kind of thing. But they still understand the need to educate their clients. So I'd love to hear what you think are some of the things that law firms are doing particularly well. And I thought that other point you made about all the bios, that's another thing we forget, is that we have to market a lot of individual people. It's not just one brand. And that's a challenge, that we often forget. You don't have that one brand and maybe that CEO brand. You've got hundreds. But yeah, I'd love to hear your take on
Yeah.
that.
So there's like two questions in there, both of which are really good.
Yeah.
And I want to
Yeah.
try and touch on both of them.
Yeah.
So I'll take the last one first because it
Yeah.
dovetails into the first one. Is
Yeah.
this idea of, and this is sort of one of those age-old debates, is it, do people hire the lawyer or do people hire the firm?
Right.
And the answer is
Hmm.
yes.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So, but how do you deal with that as a marketer or business developer and a communication strategist or any type of, trying to figure that out? And you're exactly right. There you have to, and it goes back to what I said, is that while law firms are doing some really interesting things about using non-lawyers, and we can have a fight about that term, and I just, at this point, there's not a better one in my head, and I don't mean it to be derogatory. People who are not
Right.
lawyers is a longer way of saying
Hmm.
that. Working on practicing lawyers, working for the firm. People who are not those people bringing in business is definitely something that is happening more and more, kind of like a rock rolling downhill at a lot of firms. And I'm going to be going on an RFP pitch, and a lot of my colleagues have gone on RFP pitches for a variety of different areas, selling the firm and selling our services that aren't necessarily related to the individual who is the lead on the account. And that's another word that we're going to talk about in a minute, I'm sure. But the idea that we have to create relationships one-on-one with individuals at a business to get business. On the other hand,
Hmm.
they have to trust that the institution that they're hiring, who the person that they have a relationship with works for, is going to have
Right.
a sufficient resources, depth, knowledge, strategy, all the stuff to be able to stand behind the person that they have the relationship with, that they chose to hire. So it's a
Hmm.
balancing act. And the answer, like I said, is, do they hire the lawyer or the firm? Yes. And it can depend on the type of business they're hiring too, obviously. But I think that is a challenge, certainly not necessarily faced by a lot of consumer oriented B2C businesses. It's
Mm.
based in architecture and engineering firms, maybe, but I would argue
Not as
that
much. Yeah.
in the architecture firms, engineering firms, I think you hire a firm that's really good. Architecture
Hmm.
firms, you might hire someone who's really good, but it's only the superstars that get hired specifically for who they are, right?
Right.
I live in
Yeah.
Chicago,
Yeah.
which is a huge architecture town,
Hmm.
obviously, and people don't even remember sometimes the name of the
Yeah.
the architecture firm, but they know the person who's at the top, or at least who started
Correct.
Helmut
Yeah.
Jan or Jeannie Gang or one of those. I
Hmm.
even know there's. I'm a little bit of an architecture buff, but not that much. But
Yeah.
I still know this. I couldn't tell you what the name of their businesses are. So in any
Right.
event, so that is a specific challenge that I think, and threading that needle is something that legal marketers, the successful ones, and I think that's a lot of us, most of us,
Hmm.
do really well and don't get enough credit for, because
Hmm.
it's really hard.
Hmm.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so but the first idea is, if I remember it correctly, so guide me if I've gone
Sure.
too far, is this idea of, now I totally lost the thread, but
What? Yep. No, go ahead. Well, I mean, I wanted to, I'd love your take on what are some of the things that you
oh,
think that firms are doing really well.
innovation,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and it's funny you talk about content marketing. I went to Content Marketing World, which was a mostly
Mm,
B2C event. Oh God, probably now 10 years ago in Cleveland, and
mm,
really interesting. I was one of maybe three people from a law firm, and there was over 1,000 people there.
mm,
And what I realized there is that you are right. I think there were many lawyers or law firms who had kind of realized, hey, content is going to get me some eyeballs on my website in a way,
mhm,
using the Google algorithm or me sending out emails or whatever is going to get me some attention, and maybe even a
mhm,
conversation or two that might lead to a relationship that maybe is a short sale or maybe it's a long play. But I'm going to get some business out of it. A lot of consumer firms hadn't really reached that, and they were trying to think how that differed from advertising, which a lot of lawyers don't
mhm,
do and still don't do in any
mhm.
way. Taking out the B2C folks for a minute, because they do a lot of
Right.
advertising.
Right.
Um, but in the more business law firm oriented areas, the advertising wasn't a thing. So a lot of B2C companies, non-law firms, used advertising. But this contest stuff was like, huh? But lawyers realized, well, heck, this is about the only thing we can do. And by the way, it's a lot less expensive than advertising, so we should do this. And and there have been some leaders in the legal industry who've recognized it. Kevin O'Keefe is, Lexology is. I'll call him out. There's a couple of
Right.
folks who were sort of the forefathers and mothers
Right. Pioneered.
all
Yeah.
this
Hmm.
all this stuff. And now we all recognize it for what it is, as just a cornerstone bedrock of
Right.
a marketing plan, strategy,
Hmm.
social media, LinkedIn, all the stuff. So other stuff that people are doing, I think, is recognizing that there is this sort of siren call of getting new clients. But most law firms, unless you're in a churn law firm, and that's a different story, but most law firms, business law firms, B2B law firms, are looking at live by the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of
Mm,
their revenue is coming from current clients, and 20%
mhm,
is coming from new clients. And now, of that 80%, another 80-20 rule tends to also occur, maybe even 70-30, is you're getting new work from current clients. I'm not going to
mhm.
use the word cross seller, cross whatever people use. I'm trying to say is that law firms have recognized that there's a lot less time, energy, money needs to be spent in trying to make sure we manage our current clients as well as possible. So they've gone and done a variety of things on a more account management basis than I think a lot of other professional services firms have done strategically. Again, accepting the consulting firms, accepting maybe what are now the big four, the ones with tons of resources. But actually, some of the big firms now, law firms, have started to do a lot of stuff that's really cool. So two things. One is this idea of account management and going strategically and understanding
Right.
and working through the partnership comp systems in such a way that there's not a competition necessarily to get the client's business. It's a we're all in this together and rising tide lifts all boats kind of situation. And in those cases, you'll see firms hold on to clients and really, really increase their depth, retention, leverage, profitability, all that stuff in ways that is really, really, maybe it's not cutting edge, but it's pretty out there. There's still a lot of folks who
Yeah.
kind of wish that they were doing that stuff. So that's one thing. The other thing is another focus on data and how data and knowledge management affects the actual provision of legal services and retention of clients. Um, a
Mm,
while back, DLA was one of the first firms, and I know there's now been a bunch of other firms who've done this, who basically took all of the data that they had collected over the years, whether it's accounting, billing, collections, marketing, website, RFPs, the whole nine yards, and have said, how do we predict who's going to stay a client, who's not going to stay a client. And then let's do some regressive analysis to find out the ones who aren't going to stay a client, why are they not going to stay a client? And the ones who are staying a client, why are they staying a client, right? So you've got
Mm,
sort of a gap analysis in some ways, the regressive analysis to kind of look back
yeah.
into the past and see that. And they came up with this very cool, and they won tons of awards for it, way of basically saying, okay, so here's this client's been around for a couple of years, they're not going to be here in 2 years. Now, and then you can reach a decision point from a strategic standpoint and say, do we want to keep them or do we want to let them go? You know,
Yeah.
that is really sophisticated stuff. And it's stuff that there's now many law firms starting to do in ways that are substantive, not just sort of dabbling or dipping their toes in the water. And that's cool. And that is one of
Yeah.
those things that I wish I could do more of. You know, we can do it around the edges as a smaller firm because we just don't have as many resources. But I imagine with the advent of greater access and frankly greater products in AI related,
Yeah.
we're going to be able to do that in a way that is going to be really helpful. The last thing I'll say, I
Yeah.
almost promised two things, but the other thing is that I think law firms have finally gotten religion, so to speak, about understanding that what they've been doing all along by keeping and nurturing relationships is sales. It's
Mm,
just
absolutely. Yeah.
a different kind of sales than what they think they're used to. You know,
Hmm.
sales in the used car setting always gets a bad rap. Sales in the, you know, I'm flipping burgers or selling burgers or I'm Walmart or any of those types of things, which kind of are nonsensical comparisons, to be
Yeah.
honest. They're realizing that, you know, relationship selling is what they should have been doing if they haven't been, but they
Hmm.
realize it finally when they're kind of like maybe hit upside the head a little bit through training or through talking and coaching and whatever, article reading even.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
I had one lawyer at my old firm who we set them through a training process with a business development training folks, and she was just adamant. New partners, she's just adamant like that. This is distasteful. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here, but she did it because she kind of had to. And at the end of the 6 week program, she's like, "This is great. I just realized this let me know and make me maybe understand. I've already been doing this stuff, and I feel comfortable with
Yeah.
stuff, and I'm all good with it, and I'm going to do it more." And so,
Yeah.
you know, it's really interesting, um, the evolutionary step that we take and realizing and recognizing, feeling comfortable with some of the stuff we've been doing all along is what we should be keep doing, and we can actually now call it what it is.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's yeah. Those are really, really good points. The other thing we talk about a lot in this profession is earning a seat at the table.
Yes.
I know, and I'd love your take on, this concept and, the fact that we talk a lot about it. And I think it's important to have a seat at the table. But what are your thoughts around how legal marketers do that effectively, its importance, and what should legal marketers be thinking about?
How much time do you have? No, just kidding.
I know.
So the proverbial seat at the table.
Yeah.
Lord
Hmm.
help us. But I always wonder when I hear that phrase, I'm like, which table? And is
Right.
the seat comfortable? So,
Yeah.
but taking it for what it's intended to be, and then letting my
Yeah.
sort of more smartass tendencies fall to the wayside here, I think that the getting a seat at the table or having a seat at the table is a two-way street in many ways. Um,
Hmm.
it has to be earned, but it should also be provided. So what does
Hmm.
that mean? It means that law firms in general need to understand that marketing should always have a seat at the table. But it is marketing's, and I use marketing in general to mean, you know, not
Hmm.
just flat out marketing, but business development and then the whole stuff that we end up doing. But marketing should be able to perform while they're sitting at the table. And so
Mm, absolutely.
I think that from an advocacy basis, for either for LMA or just the legal marketing profession in general, you know, we've kind of got to understand that while we need to be thinking of creative ways of making sure people understand why it's valuable to have us be at the seat of the table, we have to also do the work that will show that we should stay at the table at the very least, if not be invited to the table. And I think that gets into a different question of what kind of role should, let's just take the CMO for instance. The first CMO title wasn't given until about, I guess it's now maybe 20 years. We're talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday. I think it was Alan Romanowski at Sidley and Austin way back in the day. Could be wrong about that, so feel free to write in and correct me. But that title was just like, oh, it's a chief. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, there's been CFOs at law firms since Moses.
Right.
So, and everybody was excited, and CIOs actually had even been at most law firms for many years. So, the idea of having a CMO was one who's like, oh my gosh. Now it's just sort of like, yeah, should it be a CMO or CMBDO? Should it be the CBDOM or whatever? We've gotten to sometimes a little bit of silly chief strategy officers. All these titles. We still struggle with actually what that role should be in terms of how it operates at the firm. And I'm going to say, if you're at that level, you should be primarily strategic, depending again on your firm, or certainly mostly strategic, as opposed to operating what I like to call, and I don't mean it in a derogatory way, a concierge service.
Right.
And I think that, certainly the concierge services provided by a marketing department at any law firm is and are important in the same way that any service is internally or externally for that matter. There still needs to be an inherent aspect of the job as the marketing leader at any law firm that is strategic in nature, that you understand the business, that you understand what you're selling, and you know it deep in your bones. Like you are the one of three people who can stand out in front on a firm of thousands and describe that firm in such a way to get a client, right? And
Absolutely.
when someone asks you, what does your firm do? You say, what do you want? And
Right.
they say, well,
Yeah.
do you do X? You say, of course we do X. And here's the three different things we've done in X over the last years. And it doesn't mean that you have to memorize everything, obviously, but you have to understand it.
Understand the business. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So that whole big, 2-minute soliloquy I just had does boil down to that. You want to get a seat at
Yeah.
the table, you have to make sure that you understand that business and you can bring something to the table.
Yeah. How do they make money? Yeah. I preach that all the time. Yeah. How do they make money and know it very, very well? And what are the factors? What's influencing that? Absolutely. I'm a big champion of that and earning that seat at the table, not just banging your wall against the door, to the room.
Or peering through the
Right.
the glass.
Yeah, absolutely. Earn it. And once you do earn it, once the leadership sees what an impact you can have on the business, you're there. So, but you have to make an impact on the business. You have to understand it. You have to know it. You have to speak their language. So, as an agency owner, I couldn't exist if I didn't do that. So you have to do that as an in-house marketer. So it's table stakes. I'd love to give you a chance before we go. This has been a really fantastic conversation, but is there something we haven't covered? Is there a final thought you want to leave our listeners with around this topic that we haven't covered?
So, final thought. Wow. So, I think that be proud of what you do as a legal marketer. I think that, and it's hard sometimes. I make a joke and I probably shouldn't, but, and I did this with at a previous firm where our marketing partner, we used to joke about it because I caught him a couple times doing this. And, you work through, you get something, you have a deliverable, or you work through a process, or you come up with a strategic plan or whatever. And the response and the feedback is, well, that didn't suck. And that's the highest form of praise that we can expect as legal marketers. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And maybe it still is, and that's just the nature of the business, right? Because like I said at the beginning of the law business is tough, and legal marketers have to be tough and smart and understand that sometimes, maybe the best that you can get is, well, that didn't suck. Take the praise as much as you can. Take the credit as much as you can. Understand and keep track of things that you can take credit for and should take credit for. And don't be cowed by others who are trying to elbow you out of the way for whether it's influence or some other type of, I hate to use this word, power within a firm. Marketing as a discipline, is they give PhDs in it, right? They don't give PhDs in law, and I have a JD, right? It's a terminal, but it ain't a PhD. And
Right.
so we are, as a profession, worthy of being at
Hmm.
the table, providing the strategy that we can push forward, and sometimes taking our licks, because sometimes not every idea is a good one. But I will tell you, not every lawyer wins every case. So,
That's right.
it's a profession to the extent that we can keep honestly improving and having some fun, hopefully, because it is marketing, and feel the reward from doing it, a job well done. So that was hopefully a little inspirational. Feel good about
I love it.
yourselves.
I love it. We need a little bit of that right now. So thank you so much. We have been talking to John Byrne of Gould and Ratner. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. This was fun. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for listening to Spill the Ink, a podcast by Reputation Inc. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.